Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, and Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisors of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management. I say it every week. I say it today, Ben. Welcome to the couch. How are you, mate?
Thanks for having me on, Bryce. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm a little nervous.
Are you? You don't like to speak
when the big
public
lights come on.
Yeah, mate. You look like a nervous sort of bloke. Hey, are you feeling vulnerable? Theme of today.
Yes.
Theme of today.
Yeah, I like it.
But before we get to the vulnerability theme, Ben, because we've got a very special guest.
We do.
All of our guests are very special guests. I don't know if you've ever noticed. They're all very special guests. But today is a very special guest. But before we get there, I think, do you know how you always have that streamer thing on the desk here?
I need it. Pick it up.
You will, and you probably may not know this.
What's that?
That tomorrow is the 23rd of February.
Okay.
And the significance is that on this day, the 23rd of February, 3 years ago, episode number 1 of the Property Couch. So we turn 3 tomorrow. Ivis, did you know that? Ivis is coming.
Happy birthday
to us.
Hey,
did you think we'd turn 3?
Well, I think we act like 3-year-olds.
That's a fairly good point.
Yeah, probably.
So, mate, we turned 3. The Property Couch has been around for 3 years. Who would have thought?
Wow.
It's been a labour of love, and it's just time has flown.
Our favourite part of the week.
And this week we had Facebook Live, Ivis, Tuesday, continuing our 15 minutes on the couch. Get some questions specifically for people who want to be read out on the couch.
And they get a, what do they get?
They get a book.
Get a book?
Yeah. Someone, Anon reached out to me.
Yep.
Remember how we read out
Anon? Oh, yeah.
So Anon reached out to me.
So we got a guest to say it was me?
Well, she said, looking forward to read the book. So we sent it to her anyway, so she could pay it forward. And she was really happy with that. So even if you've read it, we'll still send you a book.
Yeah.
So Facebook Live. So how do they get on there, Ivis? You're not going to talk, so I'm going to answer. You have to go to our Facebook page and like us, Ben, because then you get notified.
Okay.
What is it? Measure twice, cut once, just so you don't miss out. Come onto our mailing list. Yep. And we will notify. We'll let you know.
Easy.
Simple. And we've got an upcoming webinar, Ben. We're going to call it the 7 Deadly Sins of Building a Property Portfolio.
So that was new. There was news.
It's news because you're doing it as well.
And next week's Facebook Live, we might have a special guest on the couch.
We might have a very special guest.
Okay.
So there's lots happening on the couch.
Lots happening. Good.
But there's lots happening today. So my Mindset Minute theme, Ben.
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Brené Brown. She's got this TED Talk on the power of vulnerability. Yes. If you haven't watched, do yourself a favour. It's on our Facebook pages, and then I'll go and check it out.
Yep.
Now, she says, daring greatly means the courage to be vulnerable. It means to show up and be seen, to ask for what you need, to talk about how you're feeling, to have the hard conversations.
I'm big on hard conversations.
So, Ben, I thought that was a very nice scene setter for the conversation we're about to have today, because the theme around today, we've got an interview with Karla, has shown enormous vulnerability.
She has.
But we thought it would be an opportunity for people to learn from her vulnerability how they might be able to sort of relate to what was going through her mind. So we talked to her earlier in the week, didn't we?
We did, and we always say we're going to high-five you on the things you're doing really well, but we're also going to eyeball you on the things that we see you could do better. And
that's a tweet, Ivis. We're going to high-five you and we're going to eyeball you.
Yeah, because it's true. I mean, if they want to affect change, something's got to change. Okay, so in some cases, we sit down in front of people and it's like, you procrastinated too long. You should have done this 5 years ago. Oh my God, there's so much amazing things we can do with you. But in other cases, it's a little like, hold on, hold your horse. You've got all these crazy ideas. We need to set the expectation right. We need to have that reality check. And that leads into what we're talking about today.
So for the listeners, we are talking about someone who's come through our business.
Yes.
It's not an episode about Empower Wealth.
No, it's definitely not.
It does reference Empower Wealth, but it's just about someone, a human being, who has had to go through some authenticity and some vulnerability. And to be honest, we recorded it earlier this week. We'll cut to it shortly. But she was very authentic, wasn't she? She was prepared to let us read the email out. and address every point in the email and talk about how other people can benefit from what she's learned.
So, and because we've been focused in February on mindset,
feel good
February, and focusing on, challenging their mindset, we just thought this was a perfect time to have this conversation and share it with our listeners.
Very good. All right. Well, without any further ado, let's cut to the interview that we had with Karla earlier this week. Well, Ben, we've got a really interesting topic today. We've got a guest.
We do.
And Carla's going to join us. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it fundamentally goes into mindset.
It does.
And what's going on for someone before they make the decision. So
let's paint the picture here, Bryce. We don't talk about our business very often, but as soon as I saw this email come in, I knew that our listeners will get a lot of educational content out of it because it was so honest in terms of its assessment. So we're going to read that email out in a minute. But what's really important about this is when we are, when you're seeking advice, and that's what today's about. If we're going to go and speak to a professional, there's some things that are going through our mind. And so we're going to get our special guest, who we haven't announced her name yet, Karla, for the purposes, if we're not going to get her surname, but it's really important in regards to how we grab this information. And, having sat in front of literally thousands of people, this comes up around 20% of the time. And this is the sort of hardest part. So we'll get to that in a minute.
Well, Ben, you've done a little segue there. So we should get the guest of honour straight onto the couch. Hey, Karla, how you going?
Hello. Very well, thank you. How are you both?
Great. Welcome to the couch.
Thank you. It's a big pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Ben sort of gave a little entree there, but quite often when someone comes into our business and they want to seek some advice, it's a bit like going to a personal trainer and you want to get fit, but they ask you to get down and give you 20 push-ups. You only want to give 10, but they know giving you the extra 10 push-ups is actually going to be beneficial for you. And I guess that's probably a bit of symbolism on your experience, which we'll go into shortly. But it was a difference between what you thought and you needed and what you actually really did need, wasn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely was. And I suppose in that analogy you gave then, sometimes it's even just hard getting to the gym.
Yes.
So let alone to get to the personal trainer itself. But it's much easier once you're there. And sometimes you just got to breathe through those last 10 push-ups, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with your permission, is it okay if I just read out the email that you sent to us?
Please do.
All right. So it was. This is from Karla.
The title headline.
Subject, Ben, an apology.
And we don't usually get that from a customer.
So it piqued interest. An apology. But it says, "Hi team at Empower Wealth. I have an apology to make for an interaction I had with you. I had some time to think on it and have learned a few things and feel that I need to send this email to clean up my conscience. I contacted your investment team last year looking for some advice in property investing and a hope for long-term planning and guidance. As I live in Brisbane, I organised an online interview. I was met with professionalism and was excited about the possible process to take place. I'd never had an online interview before and was unsure what to expect. In retrospect, the meeting was concise and efficient, offering all the information I would have required, but I had an unfair expectation based on my inexperience. In brackets, I didn't know what I didn't know, close brackets. I expected face-to-face contact initially, but not realising how things are done these days, that led me into a spiral of disappointment, of nitpicking irrelevant issues as problems." It's very authentic there, Karla, so far. Upon reflection, I also wanted to hear my own thoughts and goals coming from a professional, which didn't happen. They had some sensible advice for me that made a lot more sense, and I was upset at them for that too. Crazy, right? In brackets. I ended up writing an email about how upset I was that I wasn't listened to, and it had an expected professional email response that I ignored, and then a follow-up phone call that I also ignored, in brackets, feeling pretty foolish by now. So essentially, I'm writing to apologise for my unfair expectations on a topic that I had no framework or understanding on what to expect, and the email that followed it. I hope that the staff member feels he did all he could to communicate effectively with me, because he did. I blamed him for not living up to my uneducated expectations. I can see that your business is full of hardworking and passionate professionals that care about what they do for their clients, and I'm sorry for being so difficult towards them. I appreciate the way everything was handled from your end, and it was a credit to your business that your member had integrity to follow up on potential issues and attempt to resolve them. I hope through my property journey that I will have the chance to work with Empower Wealth, but this time with a more open mind and willingness to learn. Well done, and wishing you every success in the future, Karla. And in brackets, Karla, you signed off in brackets, humbled, soon-to-be property investor.
Yes. Yeah, the humble pie isn't the best tasting, but it must be good for your insides. So.
Yeah, well, it's more about you. Well, talk us through what it felt like to pivot in your mind based on this is how I was feeling, then all of a sudden something triggered you to obviously pivot to the way that you've described it in the email.
Yeah, I suppose leading up to contacting Empower Wealth, we'd been given this opportunity to buy this the current place we were in, but because we wanted to build a house, I wanted somebody to tell me what I wanted to hear. So I wanted them to say, yes, buy the townhouse and live in it until your house is finished, and then, yep, great idea, Carla. You know, you've obviously been listening and you've learned so much. Go ahead and do it. Just have somebody who gets paid for that advice for a living to tell me I'd made the right decision. But the actual sentence I got was, what if you could do better with the same money invested? And that just shook me, and I thought, no, that's the wrong answer. I want to hear that. I want to hear that I already know everything. You know, you're supposed to tell me that. And it just threw that plan out the window, and I really couldn't quite shake it for a while. And then, so we stepped back from that, and as it turned out, we tried to purchase the townhouse we were living in, and it was rejected by the owner, who didn't even want to have a negotiation about it. So it turned out we didn't end up purchasing anything and just decided, okay, this is a sign, let's just build our dream house. And I'll just keep learning so that when we finish building, we can move into our investment stage there, and I'll just have had extra time to learn and educate myself. So it was in that window that I started to realise he had exactly the right sentence for me at the time, but I wasn't ready for it. So by learning more and hearing other people talk about, you know, there is possibly a better opportunity than the one you see right in front of your face, just get out of the way and maybe you can see it, like get out of your own way. That's when I had that little epiphany of, oh no, he was right the whole time. Like, we could have put the money into this, but then we would have had 20% of our wealth tied up in an underperforming asset that was convenient to live in, but was actually not our best interest for the long run.
And Carla, this happens quite often, as I mentioned in the intro. It was only last week that I was having a chat with a professional lawyer, and he was sort of saying, oh, my daughters are getting a little bit older now, so I'll probably look to buy a unit for them close to the university that they go to, and that'll be my investment. So it's you know, the investment has to serve two purposes. One, safely house my daughter who's going to go to university somewhere, and give me a return on investment. And part of me says, but what if there's a better, you know, exactly that question. What if that property isn't going to perform very well? You know, well, your daughter's secure, but we can rent her in a nice secure property that has, you know, security entry, maybe concierge at the front desk, whatever it may be, if you want that security. But why would we tie up our money given the opportunity cost associated with that? And that's part of that story. And that's why when obviously I saw the email hit my desk, I was like, I've got to share this, and I've got to share this to the podcast community, because the reality is that there are certain expectations and reality checks that happen in all of our lives. And ultimately, we have to make decisions around money that affect our lives, because we don't have, you know, infinite amounts of money. So we're going to have to go on a pathway or a course to, you know, go on that journey. And as you said, you wanted your position validated, and that happens quite a bit in terms of people coming in and say, no, I can make this happen. I've got a dream. And we're like, well, yes, you could, but we're going to, you know, we don't want to stomp on people's dreams. But sometimes there is a reality check around that dream. And, you know, effectively there's 4 levers that we talk about in the book and we've talked about on this podcast, and that is income, expenditure, time and target. That's what we're playing with. And the deeper you dive into each one of those areas, the more complex it gets around, you know, basically getting the answers, getting that visibility to make the best decision.
Ben talks about income, expenses, time and target. It goes into procrastination is one of the most expensive things you have when building a portfolio, Carla. But if you actually make the wrong decision, it's actually exponentially more difficult, because not only have you lost the time, but if you've lost some money along the way or made the wrong assets and you have to exit out of them, you could actually be starting further back. So that's something that you needed to face in your situation, wasn't it? Because as convenient as it was to have that townhouse, it may have set you back 10 years.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is that it could have jeopardised us building the house that we had already started on that path. So, because it was taking up capital that was available to us. So, we couldn't foresee what was going to happen in the build of, who knows, like there's plenty of things that can happen in the building of a house that just soak up money like a sponge, and we wouldn't have had that accessible and would have had to possibly sell the townhouse and then, many steps behind. So it actually worked out as a blessing in disguise.
And that happens. I mean, what we're talking about here is once we've made a mental decision and we think we've got to move forward, and this happens again, this is full disclosure of our business. We are obviously helping hundreds and hundreds of people every year in terms of the work we do. And what's interesting is once we move past that procrastination point, we then want action, and we want it now. And part of the planning process is to actually do a deep dive in terms of life design and trying to make sure that we're putting the big rocks in the jar in the right order. Because we can build wealth for people, but if it's not going to give fulfillment and an outcome in terms of having that dream home or whatever it may be, that's the whole point. So it's not just about property investing, it's about lining up the investments in terms of also the lifestyle design that you're trying to create for yourself. And so the first recommendation may actually be an upsize or a downsize, as opposed to a pure investment play when it comes to helping clients.
And we talk about that. Ben often says, Carla, that, if you've got an itch, we've got to make sure that we scratch it. And, part of that is making sure, the bigger picture rocks that you want to put into the plan, they have to be discussed. And then just need to flow on what that looks like. What does it look like if you go down path A? What does it look like if you go down path B and C? And then you can actually see on paper the ramifications or the benefits of each of those decisions.
Yeah, and then also the priority, how high up in the jar is it? Because that was the thing about the house. It was like, okay, this is a bigger priority. It's not sitting back anymore, not even a couple more years. Like it had been 3 years in the waiting. So it was like, no, it actually is time for this now. It was sitting at the top of the jar waiting to be actioned.
Yeah, look, it's that classic case of plan to become what you plan to become. And it's a process, not an event. Now, again, in your case, you were sort of saying, I wanted validation on my idea, but you walked away from that. Once you introspectively looked at the decision, you actually worked out that it was a process and that you needed to take stock. And in doing that, you obviously shared some really insightful information that most households will go through at some point in time, where we do get impatient. We do think, well, I've made a mental decision. Why can't this thing happen today? And especially we're seeing the property market move. Last year is an example, and the year before, we had people, the process can take, a couple of months in terms of working through, your lifestyle design, your goals, getting all the cash flows right. And people are sitting back going, but the property market's moving. And you're saying to yourself, yeah, well, there's markets within markets. We've talked about that before. So don't be panicking that you're not getting into a marketplace. There's the same thing for share investors. The amount of share investors, so I'll just wait for it to collapse a little bit. Because you can imagine the US market as an example. It's up 30%, right? And people are sitting back going, I'm not going to put into the US market yet. I'm just waiting for that 2% correction. Wait a minute. So what are you saying to me that, it's moved from 100 to 130, and now you're going to wait to get in at 128, when it could maybe move to 140. So there is no doubt that you get into the market when you can afford to get into the market, but it should be a process. It shouldn't be an impulse buy. And the amount of people that we see that we talk to who have bought off the plan, house and land package or whatever, it's like, how much research did you put into it? Well, not that much. I mean, mentally we said we wanted to buy an investment property. This was the group that we spoke to. They told us a good story and we went for it. And it's like, well, was there a big process? No, it was really, they made it so easy. Signed a couple of forms and we had our property. And it's like, well, easy shouldn't necessarily be best. this is your life's journey here, and you want the best return you possibly can.
Property investing is simple but hard, Ben.
Yes.
It's not simple but easy.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's important to understand that. But what would be your message, Carla, to our listeners who may be going through similar thought processes, or what are some of the keys that helped you turn your mindset around to go down the path of not necessarily following your own temptations, but what's in the best interests of you and your family?
So there's probably a few. The very first one, which is something I'd learned from podcasts, but also has kind of just been something that's been in our household for a while, was about educating yourself. And you didn't have to, pay for that education. Podcasts are great. Reading is great. My husband picked up a book from the op shop for 50 cents called Mindset by Carol Dweck about growth and fixed mindset. And it was just an amazing, amazing book that, really helped, I suppose, shake up my brain, shake it up and just be more open to alternative viewpoints, which is like the second point I would say is be open to the alternative viewpoint. Don't get stuck in what you want to justify. There might be more information that's completely relevant to you that could change things for the better, not for the worse because it seems inconvenient. And I would also say know your risk appetite. When we were going through all of this, I had to know and discuss with my husband, what is our risk appetite? What do we need to sleep at night, because we've got to pay the bill at the end of the day, not the advisor. So we needed to know, looking at those first two on the education we already had and all the viewpoints that we'd assessed, with our risk appetite, what was our new outcome? What was the new paths available to us for us to head down based on those three things? So they would be the things that I would advise to other people to really know within themselves the answer so that they can have a new viewpoint for where they want to travel.
What powerful bullet points they were. Education, be open to an alternative viewpoint and assess your risk appetite. I mean, when you wrote this email to us late last year, and then you referenced it for a year prior to that, Carla. So on the education front, I mean, there's plenty of podcasts around now on property investment, but back then there was only a few of us. So I mean, what was your preferred educational platform?
Your diet?
Yeah.
Yes. What was your education diet?
Well, I've got to tell you, I've got 3 kids and I'm a stay-at-home mum, so I just ate podcasts. Anything I could stick in my ear or have on in the car, I would just, whatever came in audibly, that was it. I started deleting podcasts that weren't relevant to real estate so I would have enough space on my phone to listen to the ones about real estate, because I couldn't take photos of my kids at school because I had no storage. My podcast was so big. So, I learned how to manage those. So that was really important. And come holidays, I would pick up a book, but, it really was podcasts mainly. Yeah.
Carla, there's mothers listening to this podcast now who want to know how you juggle podcasts and kids. That's exceptionally talented. I can't listen to a podcast with my kids around.
To be fair, it also slightly drowns out the complaining. So,
So as part of what we wanted to talk about, because we're passionate about education, and so this is the message around sort of some ideas. So we've jotted down some ideas. And we want your input on this as well, Carla, in terms of some ideas of how you would start, in terms of engaging with a financial professional. So we've talked about making sure you've got a team of professionals around you, and you can't avoid it. So you're going to be getting a loan, you're going to have someone look over the legal contracts, you're going to potentially have building and pest inspections, you're going to have potentially, someone helping you with the money management and potentially the asset selection, the negotiations, all of those things. So you've been on a diet of greater knowledge, and that's good because you can ultimately hold yourselves accountable, you and your husband. But if you are going to work with a professional, you can also hold those accountable as well. My background, I was the chair of PIPA. I'm now the chair of PICA, the Property Investors Council of Australia, and I still sit on the board of PIPA. And so our goal is to educate the community that if you do decide to get professional advice, these are the things that I want you to think about before you go into that meeting. So, this is about setting expectations around those things. So here's my first one. I want you to start with an open mind. So, this is what we were talking about before in terms of the role of the advisor is to understand opportunity and potential. So, we're talking about, in broader terms, possibility. Now, some of that possibility for some people who are going to get professional advice is usually around you can do better than you actually think you can. A lot of people come in, don't realise they've got the equity, they've got the cash flow, and they should have started this thing 10 years ago. So there's a real upside on that. But there's also potentially the honest conversation that you have to have around slowing down dreams and ideas. We've had some people come in very early in the piece. I want, a holiday home in Bali. My husband wants a helicopter. They want all of this big sort of story. And we're like, well, the reality is you need tens of millions of dollars if you're going to be sort of doing all this sort of high flying stuff. And the work that mainstream advisors do is not going to do that. They're not going to be able to sit here and say, yes, I'll take your money, I'll make it worth your while. You might get some developer people saying, yeah, no worries, we can make that happen for you. High risk, bigger problem to solve, potentially high reward, but also you could lose the farm as part of that process. So the first one is come into that with an open mind. Any views on that, Carla?
Exactly what you say. I completely understand it, and it's probably the hardest part from the other side as a client to reach, because you already have been at home talking with your loved ones about all your grand plans and how it's all going to be happening within a short time frame, like we've been talking about the now generation, which we're getting a little bit sucked into because we're raising them essentially, and you want to have that. But having that open mind, using that education to have the open mind, can also help you have that alternative viewpoint, accepting those alternative viewpoints when you get to the professional. So I'm thinking the more you educate yourself, then you can listen to the professional and understand what they're saying and see where it's coming from, rather than coming off a clean slate. So education would be essential to have that open mind to start with. So I can see how it would be really difficult for people who just saw something on the news the night before about being a property investor and then showing up at the investment agency and then being extremely disappointed at the end because they had no information about what was good advice, what was bad advice, and what they actually need.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, because it's often a mystery to a lot of people what it takes to have a yacht and a fast car. They know that it's a lotto dream, but they don't know what it takes to actually get to that. So I think the advisor can show them specifically what your passive income goal is and what you actually need to accumulate to get that. So you're right around that reality check, but it also takes away a little bit of that mystery. So I'm with Ben, start with an open mind. The next thing I think is healthy is you've got to have a healthy level of skepticism, because ultimately you've got to be clear on the person who's advising you, whether their agenda is their own agenda or your agenda. And you can, we obviously we're a commercial business. We've got to keep the lights on and we've got to, make a return for our effort. But ultimately, we can put our head on the pillow knowing, and plenty of our peers and competitors as well that we know that we've had on the podcast, they can put their head on the pillow knowing that they are genuinely looking for the best outcome for the client. But sadly, there's a lot of people around who don't have that as the agenda. So just that a little bit of healthy skepticism, but not so much that you don't trust anyone. But you've got to, I always say to people when they walk into a pavilion full of people who are trying to give them information about property at the expos or at a talk or whatever, just be aware of what their agenda is and whose side of the equation they're working for. And once you piece that together in your mind, and we've put it in a chapter in our book, it allows you to walk through and go, okay, this information is coming from that bias and this information is coming from that bias, and allows you to make a better decision. But maybe you had a little bit of healthy skepticism around our approach.
Yeah, check the colour of their shoes under the desk, should we?
Yeah, white shoes. I used to live on the Gold Coast, but I never rolled around in the white shoes.
Yeah. So that's the other thing with the skepticism. The education helps that too. You can see if they're talking the things that you've listened and read about, or are they talking about, off the plan in the middle of nowhere in a 50s plus retirement village.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that comes also back to, point number 3 we talk about. Their fundamental advice needs to be based in sound logic, but it needs to, what you find a lot of the spruikers and all that do, they talk about their magical win. So they may have recommended 50 different land subdivisions or 50 different blocks of apartments, and they've had one or two big wins in that, and that's all you see. You see that, this one went up 38% in the last 12 months, and they're resting all of their reputation and message on that, and people get sucked into that. So the fundamental knowledge in terms of why they're investing around supply and demand, owner-occupier appeal, investment grade versus investment stock needs to be sound, and that needs to be logically delivered to you in terms of that, because that's always a challenge in terms of we get spruiked, we get excited about the examples that they use, but ultimately, if they've been around 5 minutes, they've only bought 50 properties or whatever, some of the better companies that have been around for a decade or more are usually telling you that they've got some runs on the board, and the majority of the people that they're helping, they're having good results with.
Hey, the other thing to think about too, Carla, is we always say you can outsource the execution, but you don't want to outsource the understanding. So it needs to make sense, and not just a portion of it. You need to understand the whole lot. And if you think about, from my perspective, most people who have a material income in this country and others around the world, but in this country, they usually want to park it in real estate in the form of their principal place of residence. Unless they've been blessed with an inheritance or a lotto win, they've typically got to get a mortgage to borrow that principal place of residence. And ultimately, at the end of each month, they're focused on the cash flow surplus over and above the mortgage to make sure that they can make their ends meet. So at the very core, it's about trapping some surplus and then putting that surplus to work in your favourite investment vehicle. Some people's favourite vehicle is lifestyle. But for those people who want to actually build some wealth base, they've got to put it into their preferred vehicle. So ultimately, it's about cash flow. Ultimately, it's about understanding that it's that extra surplus. Ultimately, it's about making sure that you've got enough money at the end of the month to fund your obligations, but also having medium and long-term understanding that it's not just about the today, like you were saying, moving into the townhouse for today. It's got to have the medium term and the long term effects on it too. So the whole lot needs to make sense, and it needs to be brought down to the basics of cash flow movements in your household.
So Carla, question without notice. Did you speak to any other parties? Did you have any consultations with anyone else as part of your journey on discovering what sort of professional advice is out there?
Do you mean as in searching for other?
Yeah. Did you have any other appointments?
Advisors?
Yeah. Did you have any other appointments with any other companies? Did you go to any seminar events or any of that sort of stuff?
No, not specifically. I did a lot of searching and researching local agents within Brisbane.
Yep.
Because that's where I'm from. But it was back to the part of, okay, I'm busy. I'd be interviewing all these people to see if our to go through those 4 things that you were just talking about, seeing where they were coming from and whether or not it had sound advice. And I thought, there's this perfect opportunity here of people I've already listened to who are saying things that make sense to me that is all coming from logic and have no prior agenda towards other companies. Why not ask them? So essentially the answer is no, I didn't.
Yep.
But I felt like there was enough connection with understanding what was being said through the podcast for me to go, this identifies with us.
Yeah. Look, and that sort of leads into, where I was going with that. Usually you'd probably go and see 1, 2, maybe 3, similar to the way in which, it's always advocated that you go and speak to 1 or 2 mortgage brokers to get an opinion. Just like doctors, if you're not quite happy with your doctor, get a second opinion. Those types of things are true. Because one of the things that always comes up as a theme is around, the people who have their own agenda usually have one rule. They have one theory around how to invest, and that's it. They're a closed shop. So there's sort of that shoehorn approach, and it's not specific to you. It's like you don't, Bryce, we've got that great analogy. You go into the doctor's surgery and you get a script. You get diagnosed before the information is. I mean, in our initial consultation, as we do, it's free for anyone who wants to try it out. There are a lot of people who expect to have all the answers in that meeting, and hence, obviously, Carla.
Do you know anyone like that, Carla?
No, I wouldn't know anything about that.
And the reality is there's a lot of number crunching. There's a lot of moving parts that need to be sorted through. So it's unlikely that you're going to get all the answers in that first meeting. We always talk about trying to give 2 or 3 good takeaways. Things like get your offset working properly, set up your money smart, do a few other things that's going to be part of that. But in a lot of cases, it's like, we don't know the answer yet. We've literally just taken your blood pressure and we're getting some bloods taken off for testing, and we've got a lot of other questions. And once all that information comes back, then we can basically start to form a view and an opinion in terms of what that looks like. And I think for me, it's critical that every person's situation that we're looking after is completely unique to each other.
And Carla, quite often we get together as a team on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we're workshopping different scenarios that come up too. So, this happened for this particular client, this happened for this particular client, so that we can make sure that that one size fits all or the one trick pony doesn't apply to the advice that we give, because as even families with very similar sort of traits, there's stuff that's just specific to them, but the old one size fits all is probably it's a feature of our industry.
Carla's perfect case. So we're building, so we might have to rent. Rather than rent money's dead money. Why don't we buy that property and then ultimately have that as an investment for some period of time? There's upsizing, there's downsizing, then there's moving into investment properties after you renovate them and turning into your family home. There's lots of different moving parts. There's rent vesting, there's all of these different choices. So there's almost 10 core choices that a household can make around creating wealth. But ultimately it's about getting connected with what they're looking for, because money's not going to make you happy. If you don't have that nice home and that life design that you were looking for, then you're going to potentially reverse out of these investments, and that's when it's going to actually cost you money as opposed to delivering you the outcome that you were looking for. So it's better to plan first and then execute second, isn't it, Carla?
Yeah, absolutely. And that defence strategy that you guys talk about really came into play with the risk appetite of, okay, what will it mean if all my, well-intended agenda doesn't work out because I haven't done the numbers properly and I actually don't, operate in this space full time? What happens? And then the responsibility comes back to us. We've got to pay the bill at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's right.
Ben mentioned that it must be specific to you, Carla. You're actually frustrated about that. When you were specific to you, don't do that plan, and you're like, no, don't make it specific.
So I'll show you guys.
I was like, no, I know what I'm doing, and no one can tell me otherwise. And then, thankfully, the landlord did.
Carla, what's really interesting about that is we do have meetings like that where people do walk away and they don't change that mindset. So you were able to internally review that and then, basically see some clearer air. But there are some people that we talk to and they just don't like the message that's being told to them around that. And it's a good segue into the next point around when you're looking for an advisor, you want an accountability partner, don't you, Bryce?
Absolutely, because that analogy we talked about with the 20 push-ups at the top of the interview. I've had a personal trainer, Ben, and I would never go to the gym if it wasn't for that person being there. Correct. And the disappointment of not letting them missing that appointment hurt me. And
for the greater good.
But then they asked me to do stuff I would never do on my own, Ben. Why are they asking me to do that? But ultimately, it's in my best interest. So, I mean, we could go into the fact that an accountability partner, you've got a better chance of achieving your goals, particularly if you write it down. But ultimately, if you have someone outside of the comfort zone of your own life, that's going to keep you on track. And have you found that, and just having that accountability partner, how's that served you, Carla?
Yes, it's definitely made me more aware of the information that I'm providing before I provide it. I need to look through it all with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that I am saying what I mean and meaning what I say and following up, because if I don't, then they will, and then it all comes out. So I have definitely found that. And I suppose that leads me to asking you guys a question, if it's okay.
Yeah, brilliant.
Do you guys look and monitor each other's portfolios? Do you have a subjective view or get subjective advice based on your own situations.
100%. I mean, part of being in a team like we are, as an example, so we have investment committee meetings, but we also, one of our core values in our business is collaboration. So we do know what each other's holding, and we do, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And we do share those ideas because, we practice what we preach. So one of the big parts of that is, our team are obviously buying investment properties. They're not just sitting there basically being property investment advisors and then building a portfolio of shares or cryptocurrencies. Those types of things just don't happen. What we are doing is, we want to help everyone on that journey. I mean, look, property's just a vehicle. We've always said that. I've never had an enormous love affair with bricks and mortar to a point where I get emotionally attached to it. It's a vehicle for me to be able to do that. In terms of a home, I want a nice home. I want it to, represent who I am and what it means. But I'm pretty simple in that sort of sense. I want the money to be able to provide me experiences because for me, experiences is where my happiness comes from. It doesn't come from material things. It comes from sharing journeys with people, going fishing holidays or just basically, exploring new cultures and new things and giving the ability to take the family to new environments and looking at, amazing natural wonders is where I get my drive from. And it's similar for Bryce.
Yeah, and you are the sum of the average of the 5 people that you spend most time with. So we are biased because we spend a lot of time with property investors just in this building. But ultimately the goal, and it's an open goal for all of our team, is that they will be working with our business for as long as it takes for them to achieve their passive income goal, and then they're gone. They're off. They can go and fulfill what they want to do with their own purpose and put their head on the pillow knowing that they've helped a handful of people along the way do exactly the same thing. So we're in a building full of property investors who talk property investing and compare notes.
Oh, and we say no, don't do that. Yes, that's a good buy. Jump on top of that because ultimately as an accountability partner, you're doing and what you want out of any advisor that you're working with is you do want to be high-fived on the things you're doing really, really well, but you do need to be eyeballed. You do need to have tough conversations around some of the stuff that can be improved. And we all need that. I mean, we all fall into habits when money's coming in, we might overspend. So, we all need to have that partnership, that someone who can basically call it for what it is. That's part of, what you want in the value of the work you're getting when you ever go and see a professional.
Carla, I helped my first client buy a property back in 1998, but I didn't buy my first property till 1999. That's because I was young and green. I was just keen. I wanted to get involved with it. But as a result, I was in my early 20s and I was helping people that were in their late 30s and 40s. So I've actually had the privilege now of seeing quite a number of those people in those early days who actually acted on that advice and are now enjoying a really fruitful retirement, passive income, freedom, whatever you want to call it. Because of some of those decisions. So in this business, you don't get to, you don't necessarily get to pat yourself on the back after 1 or 2 years because you've got to wait a cycle. But that is definitely something that drives. And to answer your initial question, we definitely compare notes.
Yeah, and the final one that I want to raise before we open it back up to you, Carla, in terms of anything else you want to ask us, ongoing support. So there are. A lot of these sort of spruiker businesses are very transactional. There's nothing really in behind them in terms of what they do. So you want to make sure that whatever the professional advisors that you're working with is, what's the sort of management? In our business we talk about, clarify, evaluate, plan, implement and manage. What are they doing? What sort of additional support are they going to give you? And it comes back to that accountability piece in terms of that ongoing support to keep you on track, to keep you focused on what's next. And, we're very strong on plans and planning that story out as part of that journey. So, for me, if you're going to be interviewing someone that you want to work with, you want to go through these things. You want to walk in. So I'm going to wrap them up. You walk in and you basically talk about, I want to have an open mind. This conversation could go in any directions and I'm open for that. I do want to have a level of skepticism, but I also want to have, as you were saying before, Carl, I want to have some understanding of the topic, the subject matter, because I don't want them to pull the wool over my eyes. I want them to talk to me about the fundamentals of investing, and I want them to not just talk about the one great result they had, but I want to basically get them to understand, what's the fundamentals that are going to see a long-term return for my portfolio. I want them to make sure that they're not just talking about 80%, because anyone can talk 80% of the good stuff, which is what all of the spruikers do as well. That's why it's so compelling for people to want to work with them. But it's that final 20%, whether it be the asset selection, whether it be investment grade versus investment stock, supply, demand, those types of things are really important. The advice must be tailored to you, not a shoehorn approach. It's like everyone can do this because of blah. It needs to be looking at your personal circumstances. You then got to make sure that they're going to hold you accountable, and that goes two ways. You, with your knowledge and mindset, can also make sure that whoever you're working with is going to be accountable to you in terms of the advice that they give. If they're a good business and they're fee-for-service business, you obviously want to get value out of that advice, and you want it to pay in spades over the long term, because the reality is good professional advice does cost a fair amount of money. So you want it to be able to deliver you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of the next journey of your journey, your wealth building journey. And finally, how are you tracking that? How are you staying on course? What are they going to do to continue to support you in that process?
It's 5 really good points, and I can absolutely relate to it from my point of view of going to talk to people from your company. But I'm thinking even talking to our mortgage broker for, our personal building situation, even that point, if you don't understand, don't bother signing the paperwork, because the paperwork says sign if you understand.
And all care, no responsibility. Exactly right. So really important that you do that.
Hey, to close the loop, Carla, have you finished the build?
No, we have 3 months to go. We're 6 months into a very long build, but it's definitely had its challenges, and like I said before, everything's worked out for the best in regards to holding on to our money, because it's a sponge. It's a sponge.
Yeah, we might have to get you back on for that, because I've recently gone through a renovation that's hopefully only about 3 weeks from finishing. So I do want to do a podcast on what I've learnt on my third renovation, because this one, and we'll have to get you back on, because I think there is some lessons here for everyone.
You could you could be on an episode of Grand Designs, mate, because some of those episodes have gone for 5 years. So
it feels like that. I'm ticking over a year in our reno.
I can relate to that. Come next month, it'll be 4 years since we bought the land. So it's been a long, and 3 years of planning. So it's been a long journey, but it adds to the excitement. The joke is that our eldest son, he was in about year 9 at the time, and we said, by the time this house is finished, you won't live here anymore. And that's exactly what's happened. We've got a spare bedroom now. He's moved out.
Hey, last one for me, Ben. I don't know if you've got a closing one, but Carla, what have been the benefits of the transformation in your thinking for you and your family? So you've obviously done a really great pivot, and you've been really kind to share that with the community. But what are the tangible benefits from the change in your thinking?
That's a really good question. I suppose it's just made me a lot more flexible. Mm-hmm. It's almost completely changed my mindset throughout everything, not just when it comes to investing. Having to have that open mind with, like, personal finances within the home, when bad news comes your way of whatever it is, problems that other people have that might actually not be a problem because you're looking at it with a more open mind, that, they ask for help and you're like, actually, I can see a different way around here because I'm not so locked in. I've really also gathered that things are more holistic than you might see them at first. Property investing seems like a very cut and paste sort of, well, not cut and paste, I suppose a straightforward journey at first. I thought, okay, you get money, you put it into a property, it gives you return, and then you eventually retire, and that's where your income comes from. But actually there's so many other levels to it that all matter to the outcome. It's a really big, you've got to have a holistic view in how does this machine work. It's not so linear. And that's really been my big, I suppose, learning moment.
And you didn't go broke on the process. I mean, imagine. and
Definitely not.
That's an important point. I mean, in some cases, the best advice is to not go for that investment property before you get your dream home, whether it be upsize or build or whatever. Because what would have happened potentially is you may have had to make some sacrifices on what went into your family home because you've got this investment property. So, you know, the finishings, the furnishings, the whole build could have been compromised because you were committed and you got caught up in sort of owning this asset that at the time probably hasn't been growing in value either. So you get frustrated with that and then you sell out of that, and that's where the losses come from. So some of the best advice is to take no action at all until we get that big rock in the jar. And then once you've got that, you'll have the equity, they're ready to go, and then you can basically build out your portfolio following that, as opposed to trying to squeeze one in because you panic about, you know, we're not getting any younger and so forth. So in some cases, that's why I always refer to it as, if you've got an itch that you need to scratch about, is your house not the perfect home that you want, then we're better off trying to work that through and make our advice around that first before we start building out the portfolio.
Yeah, and at the time I really thought maybe this time would just be dead time, just waiting and waiting, but actually there's no such thing as dead time. It's turned into education time, it's turned into reflection time, it's turned into savings time, because we've been able to have that money, instead of paying 2 mortgages at the same time, to keep saving and keep waiting and keep planning, so that when the build is finished, we can look at, right, what's next? Where are we now? We're not backwards. We've actually been working whilst waiting, so we're ready to go as soon as we can.
Sweet. That's brilliant. Fantastic.
Hey, do you have any other questions that you wanted to ask of us, Carla?
Actually, I did. I've been kind of jotting down a few notes here while we've been talking, things that just pop into my mind. And I suppose one big question I have is, like, I've had a light bulb moment during this journey. Have either of you got a big light bulb moment that had changed your trajectory or mindset along the way in your journeys?
Absolutely. For me, when I was initially, the philosophy was around creating retirement through equity and servicing debt with debt. But I've got to hand it to this fella across the mic here. It was largely around not getting carried away with sort of pounding your chest that I've got 10 properties, I've got 20 properties, I've got 30 properties, but what's your end game? What's your passive income goal? And then what do you need to get to reverse engineer to get that? Because it might be 3, it might be 4, it might be 5. You might be surprised at how little it actually takes to transform your life and get a passive income without having to feel like you've got to keep up. So my portfolio is now driven towards passive income rather than he who dies with the most property wins.
Yeah. So, and living off debt. And for me, you know, mine came early on, which was really good. I mean, a couple of things. Noel Whittaker's book, which we've talked about before, which is around money management. That was, you know, I read that when I was 16 or 17. So that set up some good baseline knowledge. But the cash on cash return stuff, and then comparing that into the property story. So that's basically return on equity. So it's basically my $50,000 of my money could control something worth $400,000, and I'm getting a return on that. That just blew me away. And now there's contracts for difference, there's margin lending in the share market, very dangerous stuff. But when it came to, I could understand that property was an essential need and I could do this sensible gearing for myself and my family, that was a light bulb moment, and off I went in terms of understanding that I will buy based on what my cash flows will allow me to buy, and then I'll buy five of them and then retire the debt, and that's it, I'm done. So, you know, that was it. But it was just this leverage piece early on that allowed me to, you know, use the power of time compounding return that just sold me. And that was really how I created the business, because once I understood that, and I then thought, well, if we're going to help other people do this, cash flow management and getting those cash flows right and understanding people's situation is where the best advice can be, along with, you know, buying the assets. So, you know, the two things we absolutely are passionate about on this podcast is money management, you know, and that includes finance, but also in terms of asset selecting and the research around, you know, trying to get an outperform property as opposed to just getting any standard property will do.
Yeah. Excellent. No, that really answers that for me, because it completely relates because it's all connected. It's all that money management has just made a big difference, especially in the last year of having a look at, right, where does it all go? How are we using it? You know, now that we've got this interest coming out of our building, you know, our building.
The drawdowns, you're starting to get,
and we've been renting our whole life. So to get to this point, it's like, okay, this is what they've been talking about. This is why it's important to have the money smarts here so that we have, you know, every dollar available at that daily calculated rate that they charge me at the end of the month. So it's really become very beneficial on our day-to-day lives for this information. So thank you very much, Ben.
No, brilliant. I'm glad.
Well, if anyone's hearing this for the first time, Ben, they can go to thepropertycouch.com.au, download that Money Smarts, and put into place what Carla's talking about. And it's free.
It's free.
It's free. Hey, Carla, you obviously a client of ours, but you're a coucher. You've been listening to us since episode 3. So you've been in for the long haul. We appreciate the time investment in listening to the Property Couch. But
yes, I've listened to all the footy banter and just about every language of how to say goodbye with a French accent. And
you heard that too. You heard that too.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really valuable at the time, but those two parts just lighten the start and the end. But I do enjoy the Mindset Minute and the life hack.
I didn't feel like you needed to balance it up.
Good to see someone does.
I occasionally clean my keyboard with the sticky pads. So
there we go.
That's all I needed, Carla.
That's the one I do too.
That's all I needed, because I got mocked enormously for that. So in-house here.
Great.
But
hey, completely relatable to the average Joe.
Yes, exactly.
Which is me.
I just bring it back to the people. So, hey, Carla, we want to thank you for being incredibly transparent. Because I think there'll be a lot of people listening to this that can, you know, if there's not a half a dozen takeaways from your story, I'd be surprised. But even if it's just one or two, you know, for your vulnerability, for them to actually hopefully have a better outcome, I think. You know, tip our hats to you, but you know, on behalf of us here on the couch, we appreciate that transparency.
Well, thank you very much. It was really, like I said at the start, it's my pleasure to be on, and I'm happy to share my story and hope it can help others for them to set themselves up for when they're old and grey and would like a passive income.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again.
Hopefully not old and grey. Hopefully they're still young and running around.
Well, Ben's young and grey, so it doesn't matter.
I am old and grey. Don't worry about that. But thank you so much for that. We really appreciate your time and in sharing that honest story. It's really important.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. Okay, what a great interview that was. I mean, there's some takeaways for everyone in that one, I think.
Oh, that's why I'm so pleased that when I reached out to her and said, Karla C, I want to get you on the podcast. I think there is a message here for people. I mean, I've been really fortunate, right? Where it's a very honourable position, and it's a humbling position to be able to take people on wealth journeys.
Sound like Prime Minister there.
Well, it's real. I mean, we're playing with hundreds of thousands of dollars of people's money, and some of them, you know, some people don't get it. Other people get it. Some people love the experience. Other people find it really challenging, really confronting. And what is brilliant about Karla's story is that she then introspectively thought it through, and she apologised because she felt angry that, wait a minute, you weren't, you know, validating my ideas. You were challenging me on those, and I didn't like it. You know, so I didn't see any value in having a conversation at all until I actually sat down and digested it, and then wrote that very great email to share with us and to share with you.
It's thought-provoking. It's not just in all areas of life, you know. You can relate that to a number of areas. In this case, it was to getting some property advice.
It takes a great person to put their hand up and say when they're wrong.
Well, Ben, I'll go back to my Mindset Minute from Brené Brown. Daring greatly means the courage to be vulnerable. It means to show up and be seen, to ask for what you need, to talk about how you're feeling, and to have the hard conversation. So, bravo, Carla.
Oh, bravo. And, you know, she came back and now, you know, she's excited about where it sits. And by the sounds of things, if you think, saved yourself a lot of heartache because the build's gone a little bit over. So imagine if she had bought that property, would have been red ink on her balance sheet.
And you can't get that time back, Ben.
No.
And when you have a false start, I often have to go 4 steps back to go 1 step forward. It's frustrating. So there you go, folks. Let us know on Facebook if that was of benefit.
Yeah,
we'd love to know the feedback. And if there's anyone else out there who feels like they've got a story of vulnerability they could share, let us know. Talk to Ivis. We can get you on the couch. So Ben, today my life hack is actually from Carla.
Oh.
When we finished the interview, we'd stopped. She goes, "I've got this." I went, "Oh, we should." So I have to.
How'd that go? Oh, got excited. Oh,
sounded like Mrs. Mangle. So the life hack from Carla is very simply, and Ivis, again, don't shoot me for this. It's for iPhone users. I'm sure there's an Android version of this. But I will remind you that the Android was the reason our first Facebook Live didn't work, but we don't want to bring that up again. So if you go to...
Didn't you, Ivis? He just
you see that? Yeah. Did you like that?
Yeah,
that was,
we don't want to bring this up, however.
Yeah, it was a little passive-aggressive.
But...
So what you do is you go to the podcast app on your phone, Ben.
Yep.
And just hold it down. And what happens is it pops up your four most recent episodes, so that you don't have to touch the app, then go through and find the property couch.
So it's a fast in.
Straight in, mate. Boom.
Fast in, boom.
Yeah, it's
away.
So that's from Carla. That's what she does. Just hold the button, wait for it to appear, straight from your home screen, straight into listening, Ivis. So what can you do on Android?
You just listen to a podcast, mate.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed, Ben, but whenever I cut to Ivis, what she does is she trims the pause out of the conversation, and she doesn't realise that I do that. So I'm actually going to notice tomorrow because I'm the one that does the quality control on this podcast.
Oh, that's
you
true.
Can't trim that out, Ivis. So, did you know?
Oh, there's that tap again. Do you like that? It keeps tapping that table. Is that passive aggressive as well? All right, did you know?
Have you got one?
Me.
Quick,
here we go. I got one.
Oh,
are we ready?
Hear the sound of the paper?
Interesting, this one. So I just came across this in some research that I was doing. The area stretching from Sydney's central business district to the Macquarie Park, which is out North Ryde. So if you've ever been out, you know where I'm talking about those people in Sydney. That's where the Sky News and Foxtel building is, out that way.
So for those people who don't live in Sydney, how long is that? By car?
Oh, by car about 25 minutes, 20 minutes drive.
That's just one suburb.
Yeah, no, it's not too big. It's a fair bit out. Oh, I don't know. I mean, as the crow flies, maybe 15 clicks, 10 to 15 clicks, probably 10 clicks. Yeah. That makes up, and this is data from 2016, but it's from a research firm called SGS Economics and Planning. 24% of Australia's GDP is generated from that corridor.
Wow.
Right. So we talk about income, lifestyle growth, and value of land. 24% of GDP, Australia's gross domestic production, comes from Sydney Central Business District up to Macquarie Park. Now, you've also got Cochlear, who's up there, so because you've got Macquarie University there, and Macquarie, there's a shopping centre there, but that's not bad, is it?
How wide is that corridor from the ocean to the mountains?
I wish I had a map. Yeah. I don't have a map.
Don't you hate that when I quiz you? Did you know?
Yeah, good question. No idea. No idea.
Ben, that is, I did not know that.
Oh, I'm finished.
Oh gosh,
Are you ready?
I thought.
Let's go next big city.
Okay, yep.
Inner Melbourne. The inner Melbourne area contributed 11.4% of Australia's East Coast cities' performance in a similar fashion. So 11.4%.
Wow.
For Melbourne's basically inner suburban ring. Not bad, is it?
So double in Sydney than Melbourne. That's not going to help with the Sydney-Melbourne debate, is it?
But we're growing.
You've just given Sydney
growing.
a little
Don't
leg
worry,
up there.
we're growing. You know, we've got some big companies down here.
Hey, you did mention Sydney CBD.
Yes.
And our office is going to be in the Sydney CBD. So,
yes.
So that's for anyone who's a property professional who's looking for a bit of a challenge, Ben.
Yes.
We are looking for Sydney-based property professionals to take up a few roles. So
that's right. We're opening advisory offices in Sydney in March.
So if that's you folks, if you're looking for a challenge, let us know. There's a few roles but it's an advisory-based role. Let us know. Go to the info at the property couch.
So that's part of just for clarity, people might go, well, what does that mean? So, working with experience with buyer's agency work, property advisory work, mortgage broking work, financial planning.
Yeah.
So yeah,
accounting.
And eventually accounting and so forth. So pretty exciting stuff for us.
It's exciting for us, but a little side note there, Ivis. But you're giving me that look like you something else that we need to no, all good. So mate, that was a great did you know. So mate, again, the power of vulnerability. We're hoping that people got some real benefit out of that, and if they could let us know on Facebook, that'd be terrific, so that we could see if something like this might be of benefit in the future. So mate, so we covered a lot, and mate, until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
See you next week.